In this segment, we describe how sock machines actually do their work. What are the components needed to form yarns into socks? On a single-cylinder machine, the cylinder, with its vertical needles, can make all the stitches needed for sock manufacturing. Included in the machine's components are the cylinder, the needles, the sinkers, and the dial with transfer bits or jacks. Knitting machines are designed so that each needle can be placed in a groove cut into the outside of a metal cylinder. Before we show you how these cylinders work, let's define parts. The cuts or grooves may also be referred to as slots or tricks. The top edge of each groove is called the verge. These cylinders are very precisely manufactured, so the diameter measured at any place is equal. Weft knitting machines are typically classified by the number of cuts per linear inch. This is referred to as the cut or gauge of the machine. For example, an 8-gauge machine has 8 cuts per inch. However, sock knitting machines are normally described by diameter and number of needles per cylinder and not by gauge. For example, cylinder sizes may relate to the size sock that will be made. Infant and toddler socks would be made on 2 3/4 to 3-inch diameter cylinders. Toddler to children sizes would use 3 1/4 to 3 1/2-inch machines. 3 3/4 to 4-inch machines make men and women sizes, and 4 to 5-inch cylinders are used for heavy socks for outdoor activities such as work, hunting, skiing, and other end uses. The total number of cuts around the circumference of the cylinder would indicate the number of needles in the cylinder. The more needles, the larger the sock, or the finer the fabric. In sock manufacturing, a wide range of machines has been developed for the various types and weights of socks and hosiery. To some extent, these machines are made more versatile by the use of on-machine attachments. The number of needles in the cylinder relates to the size of the yarns to be knit, the size of the sock, and therefore the weight or fineness of the sock. For example, common needle counts are 56 to 240. Sheer socks or hosiery would be made on machines with 340 to 400 needles or so. Very coarse products may have 100 or less needles in a 3 1/2-inch diameter machine. Needles of 200 or less, using coarse gauge yarns, would be typical of socks for cold weather wear, hiking, and other outdoor activities. Finer gauge may have as many as 400 needles and use fine count yarns. These products are typical of men's and women's dress socks. Let's look at a comparison of the same diameter cylinder, 3 inches, with different numbers of needles. The cylinder on the left has 96 needles, the one in the middle has 120 needles, and the one on the right has 144 needles. The net gauge for each cylinder can be calculated by dividing the number of needles by pi and the diameter. For example, the 96-needle cylinder divided by 3 inches and 3.14 would equal a 10.2 gauge. The 120-needle cylinder would have approximately 12.7 needles per inch, and the 144-needle cylinder would have approximately 15.3 needles per inch. The gauge is not important. However, the number of needles on this 3-inch cylinder would determine the range of yarn sizes that could be knit on each one. A higher needle count would require a smaller yarn than a lower count of needles. Another comparison shows different diameters of 2 inches, 3 inches, and 4 inches, all with different numbers of needles. The cylinder on the left is 2 inches in diameter and has 80 needles. The one in the middle has 120 needles and is 3 inches in diameter. The 4-inch cylinder on the right has 160 needles. When the gauge is calculated for all these cylinders, it calculates to about 12.7 needles per inch. The concept of gauge is important only in one aspect. It tells us that the same yarn can be knit on all 3 diameters, and if the stitch length is the same for all, we will make different sizes of socks that all have the same weight and appearance.